there's so much to unpack from what's happened in the past 24 hours, and I want to get your reaction to a lot of it here with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News and Talk. I'm Greg Bishop. Follow along, bishoponair@gmail.com is the email address. You can find me on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Just search Bishop on Air. But the best way to chime in live and local is by calling in at 217-629-7970. Now, of course, we've spent a lot of the morning so far talking about the gun bill that passed while you were sleeping. It passed just before 1 o'clock this morning, a House amendment to Senate Bill 2226. It bans the future sale of around 100 different semi-automatic rifles, shotguns, and pistols. It also prohibits the possession of any magazines that are 12 or more rounds, not 10 or more rounds. Still trying to make sense of the difference between the 10 and 12. But it does not include prohibiting anyone under 21 from getting a FOID card. But that's just one of the things that was up for consideration yesterday. You also have a bill that Planned Parenthood is supporting that would provide protections for abortion providers, but also those who provide what the sponsor of the bill calls gender-affirming health in Illinois. Plus, you've got legislation that we talked about briefly last segment about allowing criminals to change their names, including child sex offenders to change their names. It would still have to be on the child sex offender website as the new name change, but victims aren't necessarily notified. But you've also got something else that happened yesterday. And that's the Illinois Supreme Court laying out the brief schedule for that challenge of no cash bail that the Supreme Court halted just before it was supposed to be implemented January 1st. So it's going to be a couple of months before we actually get some kind of resolution to that particular challenge of no cash bail that state's attorneys from across the state have challenged. And I got a note here of another measure that could come up, and I've got to follow up to see exactly what's going to happen with it, but it deals with transferring of detainees that are unfit for trial from county jails to Department of Health Human Services facilities to be evaluated. So listen, lame duck session's not lame at all. There's tons of stuff going on, and it's pedal to the metal. But you've got that in the mix, as well as you've got the issue of no Speaker of the U.S. House yet. Yesterday, we asked you about who should be Speaker. If it's not Kevin McCarthy, somebody said that it should be the character from Christmas Vacation played by Randy Quaid. You know, the idea of guy getting his black water tube from his RV and putting it into the sewer. Somebody off air messaged me and said that that would bring a totally different dynamic to the idea of draining the swamp. So that was was kind of interesting, but a lot of stuff not getting done at the U.S. House when it comes to dealing with the business of the people, investigating the origins of COVID, investigating Hunter Biden's laptop and the president's business dealings and his benefit from that, making sure that we control spending, make sure that we deal with the border. Still no U.S. House Speaker to make that happen, so we'll see what happens there. All of those things are on the table for you to sound off here at 217-629-7970. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning. As a citizen who follows the laws, I have my FOID card. I have my concealed carry. I'm not somebody you would say is I guess somebody who is totally anti-gun would say I'm a gun nut because I have I have a gun, but I have a couple hunting guns. I have one pistol, two pistols, and one other rifle. It's just sad that I have these for sport or for protection, and I follow the rules, and this is going to affect me, but it's not really going to affect the criminals. The criminals don't care at all about these laws, and we can't just blame Chicago. I mean, it happens here in Springfield, it happens in Peoria, Rockford,
Decatur,
East Peoria, Decatur. It feels like we need to address the problem of violence, which is mental health, which is poverty, which is a lot of other things.
Yeah, and
that we're
Republicans
ignoring.
Republicans have said they are willing to have those conversations to get more funding for violence interdiction, to address mental health issues, as you said, and also the idea of families. We have too many fatherless families that leads to children not having, a full household of support and structure, and they end up getting into nefarious things and becoming not productive members of society. So yeah, there's a whole host of other things that seems to be at the crux of addressing the intent of somebody who wants to do ill will. Does a gun ban telling law-abiding citizens that they have to register with state police how many firearms they have in their house, is that really going to address violence?
No, it's not. Because I don't plan on committing any type of violence. And I don't imagine most gun owners that have FOID cards and that, have done everything that here in the state of Illinois says we need to do to be able to own a gun. I don't think any of us want to commit violence. It's frustrating, and there's so many other factors to this. And like you say, it's not just single parents. So I mean, there could be more mentoring programs. I mean, there's programs that have been put in place in certain cities that have worked and modeled. That we could model, that they do show that it reduces gun violence in their areas.
Yeah, and I appreciate the call. I got others coming in. I got full phone lines. We'll get to them all this hour, I promise. But getting your reaction to all that's happened in the past 24 hours at the Illinois State House or beyond. But a lot of focus is on that bill that passed while you were sleeping, a bill that bans certain types of weapons and magazines and creates a gun registry and so on. Could be up in the Illinois Senate today after passing the House just before 1 o'clock this morning. Good morning.
Well, it just shows how stupid the state of Illinois is. It's not the weapon they choose. It's the intent of which they want to use the weapon. Whether it's a gun, a car, a pocket, it doesn't matter. That's what we need to fix. The intent of the person's mind. We're basically taking legal citizens and turning them into criminals, which I guess now if they pass the get out of jail free with no bail, they'll be able to get out of jail. But I don't know. This new Democratic Party, they'd be willing to lay a turd on a nice piece of fine china, cut it up, and tell them that it's frickin' prime rib, and the idiots that are Democrat would eat it.
Well, that's your assertion, and I'll just let that kind of stand there. But I think one of the important things is that we do have these laws that happen. They get brought up, they get discussed, they get debated, but the consequence of it all doesn't really hit. It doesn't really get seen. So really, what's going to be the consequence of this particular bill to ban certain types of guns? It's going to require law-abiding citizens to jump through a bunch of hoops. And as a previous caller said, it's not going to impact the criminals who are already breaking laws. And one thing that was interesting yesterday in the House committee dealing with this is it was asked if this is going to increase any penalties for those that commit gun violence. And the answer was no. It does not increase penalties for those who commit gun violence. So you've got that in the work as well. Let's go to another phone call. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning, Greg. Hey, so first off, shame on the House for passing bills, while the people are actually
asleep.
Yeah. And I don't understand. If it's a very important bill, I would assume that you would want it to be talked about while everyone's awake. Why do you have to pass it in the cover of darkness and, make sure? I mean, talk about shady, right? But with that, it's just, in my opinion, a complete atrocity that this bill even, saw the House floor, because a lot of the guys on the left don't even know any of the actual terminology. They call a mag a clip, and a clip a mag. They think an assault weapon is basically a little single shot rifle. And, they're basically just afraid of something that goes pew pew. And that's all that there is to it. They're just sheep following orders. And it just doesn't make any sense, because if you would have the proper training, then you would know how to operate it. You would actually understand the ins and outs of any weapon, and you would know how to use it, how to be safe with it, how to store it, just all the how-tos with just proper training. And that's why we try to have that. I mean, with the CNC, you have to go through so many hours. You have to know what you're doing. You have to realize that, if I do pull my weapon out, I have to look. Is there people behind my target? If there is, no, you don't fire. Because if you do miss, you're firing into a bunch of people.
Yeah, there seems to be a lack of emphasis on training people about firearms and instead just spreading fear, calling them weapons of war, calling them weapons of mass destruction, when they're really simple and common, single shot, pull one trigger pull, and that fires around. There seems to be a disconnect as to exactly what firearms are. But listen, I mean, there's victims out there who have had to run away from criminals opening fire on crowds. There's victims out there who've had their children killed, and you can't just dismiss their sentiments. But at the same time, I don't think that you can punish law-abiding people who had nothing to do with those crimes, which is really, I think, the crux of this entire conversation. Guys, I got to take a break. It is Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News and Talk. We'll get more of your calls coming up, I promise, at 8:22 now on
Views with today's newsmakers on Facebook and YouTube. Like and subscribe now. Springfield's Morning News with Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY.
Back getting your calls at 217-629-7970. Again, 217-629-7970. And what's going on, Dale? Appreciate you chiming in there on Facebook. But let's go ahead and head to the phones. Thanks for your patience. Good morning. You're on WMAY. We've been talking about the proposed gun ban. Is that what's on your mind?
Yeah. No, thanks, Greg, for taking my call. No, a couple things. I'm against it 100%. I also believe that it's unconstitutional. So I believe a lot of this discussion is going to be moot when it comes down to it. One point I did want to make is I do believe that the manufacturers are happy as heck right now because you ought to see the gun sales and the ammunition sales that are going to happen this week. I think people are going to get nervous because of this, knowing the unconstitutionality and the nervousness, and I think that that's going to happen. Now, my number one reason for calling is LaSalle Ford, who I have to say is very good at what he does. He seemed like he was on target. He understood things, but I disagree with him. But you know what? He's the type of individual, it just seemed like the way he talked, that would be willing to work with people. So. Yeah,
and listen, I mean, every interaction I've had with Representative LaShawn Ford has been very, very good. He answers my calls. He answers my texts. It's a very cordial conversation that we have, and I look forward to having him live in studio even more all throughout the next General Assembly because he can provide that perspective from Chicago, being a Democrat, being in the majority party at the Illinois State House. So I really do appreciate that relationship that we have. So thanks for the call on that, and thanks for your patience. Let's go to another one. Good morning. You are on WMAY. Let's go to line 3 here. 217-629-7970. What's up?
I got a couple things I'd like to get off my chest. First off, on the appointed, you were talking about your poll about people get appointed instead of elected.
Right.
There's a rumor, and I'm a Republican, but there's a rumor about one of the Republican appointments this week that I heard, and again, I know a rumor's worth what you paid for it, that he had a bartender fired at a club he belonged to because she refused to serve him. And she said he was overserved and she couldn't give him any more alcohol. And that just sits wrong with me. You know,
it's hard to. It's difficult though to take those types of rumors, right? I mean, it's not like there was a lawsuit filed. It's not like there was, a crime that was charged or anything like that. So, what do you do with that type of information? Do you confront that individual and ask them straight up about it?
I mean, I'd like to see somebody in the media address that issue because that's just wrong. You cost someone their livelihood.
And again, listen, as somebody who is in the news business, I get tons of tips. Sometimes it feels like I'm sitting in front of a fire hydrant with my mouth wide open and it is on full blast. All right, so but when we get these tips, we have to follow up and confirm it. Of course, we don't like to talk about our sources. We want to keep them anonymous. That's why we have to go out and confirm these things. And when it comes to these types of rumors, that's really difficult to confirm unless, of course, we talk to the alleged victim in this case and then get a response from that individual. So if you do have any more information about that, please do email me, bishoponair@gmail.com, and love to be able to follow up on that. Anything else on your mind?
Yes, two other points. I think that this gun ban legislation is really going to seriously affect downstate Democratic elected officials. I mean, downstate is not going to care for this at all. But I know that talking to one of the folks in my industry who basically said this was wrapped up several weeks ago, that J.B. Pritzker has enough votes to pass it through, regardless if a bunch of downstate officials say, my voters are not going to go for that. So there's that. But my third and final point is a government that doesn't trust its citizens is a government that can't be trusted.
Appreciate the phone call. Let's take one last one here before the bottom of the hour news. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning, Bishop. Did you see yesterday where Biden mentioned about 20,000 pounds of fentanyl having the potential to kill as many as 1,000 Americans?
Biden said that? The president, Joe Biden, talked about fentanyl coming across the border?
There's been 20,000 pounds of fentanyl seized coming across the border.
That's just what's been seized. That's not what's been, coming across that hasn't been caught.
4.5 billion people is how much that fentanyl could kill.
Yeah. I mean, listen, fentanyl is an absolutely devastating drug. A small granule size of rice of fentanyl can kill people in large number. It's incredible. But of course, that's something that the U.S. House is going to have to deal with if they can get a speaker. And maybe Cousin Eddie. I don't know. Cousin Eddie with the black water tube out of his RV, draining that into the sewer. Is that who should be the next U.S. Speaker? Randy Quaid showing up as Cousin Eddie to drain the swamp. God, whoever, Eric, I think it was you that suggested that off the air in a text message. That was. It was pretty funny. All right, anyways, got to take a break. We'll get more of your calls, I promise. It is Springfield's Morning News on Double. We've been taking your calls about the happenings of the past 24 hours, especially with the Illinois House advancing a gun ban bill. In the early morning hours this morning, the Illinois Senate could take that up today when they come in. But indication is, though they're scheduled Saturday, they're not coming back. So we'll see if that ultimately plays out. They could come back early next week. Next week's going to be another busy week. You've got inauguration of Governor J.B. Pritzker and statewide constitutional officers on Monday. And then on, I believe, Wednesday is the start of the next General Assembly. So Tuesday is the final day of this General Assembly. So the General Assembly is 2-year terms. And you have the new 2-year term starting January 11th. That's based off of the election that happened in November. But before then, we thought lame duck session was going to be lame. Not at all. It has been a whole bunch of high-flying action, including this ban on certain types of semi-automatic weapons that are commonly held by people all across the state of Illinois. So been opening up the phones for you to sound off on that, and you can also sound off on other news of the day, 217-629-7970. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Hi. So I don't have a problem with banning some of the guns, but here's my biggest problem. They're not enforcing the laws against people who have them illegally, and they're not punishing people strong enough for having guns illegally. And if they did that, then the people who have them legally would probably not need or fear that they need to carry their gun with them, and they wouldn't need these huge magazines and these assault rifle type guns. if they just enforce the laws they currently have.
Well, you do have the question brought up yesterday if this bill enhances the penalties on those who are already out there committing violent crimes with guns. And this bill does not enhance those penalties. What this bill does is it enhances penalties for those who may have possession of an unregistered firearm that they may have purchased legally before the bill is enacted, if it ever is passed and enacted. It also provides criminal penalties for those who have magazines of 12 or more rounds, which I'm not sure there's any magazines out there that are 12 rounds exactly. Standard issue magazine for a modern semi-automatic pistol is like 14 or more. And standard issue magazines for certain types of rifles is like 15 or more. I'm not sure where they got this 12 number from, but you've got people who oppose guns saying you don't need 30 rounds to go deer hunting. Well, that seems to be a complete misunderstanding of the Second Amendment, because the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, has nothing to do with hunting or trap shooting.
It has nothing to do with the size of gun either.
Right. Yeah, and that's another argument that people always go to is, well, they only had muskets back in the Revolutionary War. Well, yeah, but if that was the case, they would have said everybody has a right to a musket. They didn't. They knew that technology would advance, and that's why they made it generic, saying arms. And arms can be thought of as sidearms, a rifle, a shotgun, a pistol. That does not mean a tank. That does not mean a nuclear bomb. It means arms. So we're likely going to hear a lot of this debate for the months ahead, especially if this bill does become law. You can anticipate it's going to be challenged in the courts by gun advocates and Second Amendment supporters immediately. So again, just a little bit of a breakdown of the bill that passed earlier this morning. It's a little bit different than House Bill 5855 that we were monitoring closely because, as is the case with the Illinois State House, we often see bills being gutted and replaced in very short order. So Senate Bill 2226 was amended with a House amendment, and what it did is it laid out a bunch of different guns that it says are assault weapons, and also lays out magazines as large capacity magazines of 12 or more. And it says that you have to register your firearms. If you have them, then you purchase them legally. You have to register them with Illinois State Police within 300 days of the bill passing and becoming law. For the magazines, you have 90 days not to register them. There's no registration for the magazines. You have 90 days to either get rid of them, dispose of them, transfer them out of state, or modify them, which is interesting. How are you going to modify a magazine to go from, say, 30 rounds for an AR-15 to just 12 rounds? And I thought typically any type of modifications of guns were frowned upon, but I mean, the law lays that out. But it also increases the firearm restraining order from 6 months to 12 months and allows for another 12-month extension for the FRO. One thing it did not include was the age restriction of anyone under 21 not being able to get a firearm owner ID card. There's other provisions in there, including a strike force to deal with gun trafficking. But again, asked about whether or not there's going to be any enhanced criminal penalties for people who commit gun violence. That's not in this bill. So we got one more segment left and get some of your calls, maybe review some other happenings. So stay tuned. It is Springfield's Morning News on WMAY. Let's get to one last call here before the break. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Yeah, I just listening to that about, modifying, want you to modify your magazine in order to make it legal. I mean, I guess there's a spring inside, and everybody can just keep their magazines. Maybe drill a little hole in the side of it for a pin to insert at the stopping point of your 12th round, and that's how you could modify it. But it still would make it a high capacity magazine. But anyway, to me, that just seems like it's that is such a cumbersome thing for people to try to enforce, and everything that goes into that, that thought process is just, it's impossible.
Well, I don't know. I don't know you from Adam, but do you have firearms? Do you know people with firearms? And if so, how many magazines do you think they have, or do you have?
Oh,
do you only have one? Do you only have one? Maybe two.
Only one. Yeah, that's crazy. It's like, and I mean, I understand trying to protect people, but I was listening to the one that you had on before, the one who was sitting in the legislature,
Representative
as
Ford
this was passing. Yeah, and he said that one of the main reasons was just to stop selling assault rifles. Well, it's like, that is like, I guess, putting the cart before the horse, right? If that's what your real reasoning is behind this, then that's not a good enough reason. It's like, that's the reason why you're doing it, or that's the effect of what you're trying to protect. Not, it's almost like, well, we're wanting to just ban the sale just because.
Yeah, and I don't know how that's ultimately going to lead to less gun violence, but we'll see what happens in the Illinois Senate. Okay, this has got to be quick, and this is it for me today because I'm out of time. Good morning, you're on WMAY.
Greg, I don't think anybody's paying attention to the big picture, because if I have 10 guns and each one of them has 2 magazines, or do I get 2 magazines for each gun? Do I only get 2 magazines, and
No.
It's got to fit every gun I own?
No, the magazines, if you have magazines that have more than 12 rounds, if this thing passes, you have to get rid of those magazines or modify your magazines. There's no allotment unless you're police or military. Not even retired police get the magazines.
But I'm only allowed to have 2 magazines, right?
No. Hey, you can't have any magazines over 12.
Oh, okay. Oh, no. At one time, I thought there was a limitation that you could have up to 12, but you could only have 2 magazines.
Nope. The former law also, or the former bill also said that you couldn't have any magazines over 10. They modified that with a bill they passed last night to say no magazines over 12. Guys, I'm plumb out of time. It is Springfield's Morning News.